thought I was dating a struggling entrepreneur. Turns out I was just his personal ATM, and he had the audacity to steal from me on our anniversary. At 42, I believed I had finally found someone who appreciated me for who I was, not what I could provide. David was 28, charming, and claimed to be building his own tech startup. For 6 months, I supported his temporary financial struggles because I believed in his dreams. I paid for our dates, covered his groceries when he was between investor meetings, and even helped with his rent twice. But on our 6-month anniversary, everything shattered in the most humiliating way possible. Picture this. I'm sitting in an upscale restaurant dressed in my best outfit, celebrating what I thought was a milestone in our relationship. The bill arrives. $180 for dinner. As usual, David slides it toward me with that boyish smile that once melted my heart. Babe, you know I'm waiting for that investor call next week. I pay without complaint, as I always did. But when I excused myself to the restroom, I had no idea David was about to cross a line that would change everything. When I returned, something felt off. My purse seemed different. Later that night, checking my banking app before bed, I discovered the truth that would ignite a fury I didn't know I possessed. David hadn't just made me pay for dinner. He had stolen $200 directly from my wallet while I was gone. That was his biggest mistake. Let me paint you the full picture of who I am and how I ended up in this mess. I'm Sarah, a 42-year-old marketing director for a mid-sized tech company in Austin. After my divorce 3 years ago, I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I bought my own condo, advanced in my career, and finally reached a place where I felt confident and financially secure. My ex-husband had been controlling with money, so my independence meant everything to me. I wasn't actively looking for love when I met David at a networking event 6 months ago. He was presenting his revolutionary app idea to potential investors, and honestly, his passion was infectious. Tall, dark hair, bright green eyes, and this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. At 28, he had this youthful energy that made me feel alive again. Our first date was coffee. Simple, sweet. He talked about his startup dreams, how he was bootstrapping everything, living minimally to invest every penny into his business. I found his dedication admirable. When he suggested our second date be a walk in the park because he was saving for a crucial business expense, I thought it was refreshingly humble. I should mention that I've always been generous. Growing up with parents who struggled financially, I promised myself that if I ever had the means, I'd help people I cared about. My friends often joked that I'm the mom of our group, always picking up tabs, always offering to help. David seemed to appreciate this about me. He'd thank me profusely when I paid for dinner, promising to take care of everything once his business took off. He'd bring me small gifts, flowers from the grocery store, handwritten notes that felt more meaningful than expensive presents. Our relationship moved quickly. Within 2 months, he had a key to my place and was staying over most nights. He said his apartment was too distracting for work, and my home office was perfect for his late-night coding sessions. I loved having him around. After years of coming home to an empty house, his presence filled a void I didn't realize existed. The intimacy felt real. He'd cook breakfast for me, using my groceries, of course, give me shoulder rubs after long work days, and listen intently when I vented about office politics. We'd watch Netflix together, plan weekend trips that I funded, and talk about the future. He even introduced me to his younger sister, Emma, who seemed to genuinely like me. I told my friends and family about him. My best friend, Lisa, raised an eyebrow when I mentioned always paying, but I defended him. He's investing in his future, I'd say. I'm investing in our future. My parents, who had worried about me being alone, were thrilled I was dating again. My mom would ask about David every time we talked, and I'd share stories about his business ideas and ambitions. I was proud to be with someone so driven. The sex was great too. He made me feel desired and beautiful in a way I hadn't felt in years. He'd tell me how mature and sophisticated I was compared to women his age, how lucky he felt to be with someone so successful and put together. Looking back, I realized these were calculated compliments designed to keep me giving. But at the time, I felt like I was living in a romantic movie. Here was this ambitious young man who saw past my age, who valued my mind and my heart. The fact that I was financially supporting our relationship seemed like a temporary situation, an investment in love. I even started imagining a future together. Maybe we'd get married, combine our lives completely. I pictured helping him launch his business, being the supportive partner who believed in him when no one else did. I fantasized about the day he'd become successful, and we'd laugh about these humble beginnings. My friends at work knew about David, and I'd light up whenever his name came up. I was that woman, glowing, happy, talking about her boyfriend's dreams and potential. I felt useful, needed, and loved. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't his girlfriend. I was his mark. But everything started to change when I began paying closer attention to the details. The first red flag should have been his investor meetings. David would dress up in his one good suit, carry a leather portfolio I'd bought him, and head out for these crucial appointments. He'd return hours later, either celebrating a promising conversation or disappointed about traditional investors not understanding innovation. But here's what bothered me. In 6 months of dating, not a single investor had said yes, not even a maybe. For someone supposedly building a revolutionary app, he had remarkably little to show for it. When I asked to see his work, he'd get defensive. "It's still in stealth mode," he'd say. "I can't risk anyone stealing my ideas." The second red flag was his friends. In all our time together, I'd met exactly 2 of them, both younger guys who seemed more interested in partying than entrepreneurship. When we'd go out with them, David would subtly signal for me to pick up the tab for the entire group. "Just this once," he'd whisper. "I'll pay you back when the app launches." But the biggest red flag was his relationship with money, specifically his complete lack of anxiety about not having any. Most people struggling financially show stress, make sacrifices, or work side jobs. David seemed remarkably comfortable being broke. He'd order expensive entrees without hesitation, suggest pricey activities, and never once propose a free alternative. I started testing small things. When he mentioned needing new shoes, I waited to see if he'd figure it out himself. 3 days later, he casually mentioned how his current shoes were affecting his confidence in investor meetings. The manipulation was so smooth, I almost didn't catch it. Then there was the Emma situation. His sister, who I'd grown fond of, let something slip during a family barbecue I'd paid to cater. She mentioned how David had always been good at getting people to take care of him, and how their mom used to worry he'd never learn to be independent. When I asked what she meant, Emma looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. But David's behavior was escalating in other ways too. He'd started making comments about my lifestyle, how I could afford to be generous because I didn't have real responsibilities like building a business. He'd critique my spending on things like my gym membership or monthly facials, calling them frivolous, while simultaneously expecting me to fund his protein powder and co-working space membership. The gaslighting was subtle but constant. When I mentioned feeling like our relationship was financially one-sided, he'd turn it around. "I thought you understood that I'm building something bigger than just a paycheck. I thought you believed in me." He'd make me feel shallow for caring about money, selfish for wanting reciprocity. He also started pushing boundaries in other ways. He'd use my laptop for urgent business tasks when his was acting up. He'd borrow my car for investor meetings when his was in the shop. Each request came with a compelling story and a promise that it was temporary. I found myself making excuses for him to my friends. When Lisa pointed out that I'd paid for every single date, I defended him. "He's not using me. He's focused on his goals." When my coworker mentioned that 6 months seemed like a long time to have nothing to show for a tech startup, I got defensive. Innovation takes time. But privately, doubts were creeping in. I'd catch myself calculating how much money I'd spent on our relationship, easily over $3,000 in 6 months. I'd wonder why he never seemed stressed about his finances, why he never suggested cheaper alternatives, why his business expenses always seemed to coincide with things he wanted. The breaking point started building 3 weeks before our anniversary. David mentioned that his biggest potential investor wanted to meet at an expensive steakhouse downtown. He needed to dress the part and pick up the tab to show confidence. Could I loan him $500? I said yes, of course. But this time, I did something I'd never done before. I started paying attention. I noticed he didn't actually leave for any meeting that day. I noticed the $500 seemed to disappear on DoorDash orders and new clothes. I noticed that when I asked about the investor meeting later, his story had inconsistencies. For the first time in 6 months, I started to wonder, was David actually building a business, or was I the business? The anniversary dinner would give me my answer in the most devastating way possible. The week leading up to our anniversary, I decided to conduct my own little investigation. I told David I was planning something special for our 6-month milestone, and his reaction was telling. Instead of offering to contribute or suggesting we split costs, his eyes lit up with anticipation. "You're amazing, babe. I can't wait to see what you planned." I made reservations at Meridian, the upscale restaurant where we'd had our first official date. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd paid for that dinner too, but back then I'd found his embarrassment endearing. Now I was curious to see if he'd even attempt to reach for his wallet. During that week, I started documenting things more carefully. I noticed David's work schedule consisted mainly of playing video games on my couch and ordering lunch on my credit card, which he'd somehow convinced me to give him for emergencies. His investor calls were actually phone conversations with his friends about weekend plans. The most revealing moment came when I suggested we have a quiet anniversary at home to save money. David's face fell immediately. "But babe, this is a milestone. We should celebrate properly. You only turn 6 months once." The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost insulting. I also started paying attention to his phone habits. David was usually glued to his device, claiming he was monitoring market trends and networking with potential partners. But I noticed he'd quickly switch screens when I walked by, and he'd step outside for important calls that seemed to happen whenever I was around. 3 days before our anniversary, I made a discovery that chilled me to the bone. David had left his laptop open on my kitchen counter, and I saw a text conversation with someone named Mike. The messages were discussing the older chick who was totally loaded and how David was playing the long game. My hands shook as I read further. David was describing our relationship as a side hustle and joking about how easy it was to get me to pay for things. There were messages about other women too. Apparently I wasn't his only investor, but I didn't confront him. Instead, I decided to let our anniversary dinner play out exactly as he expected. I wanted to see just how far he'd go. The night of our anniversary, David showed up at my place wearing the new shirt I'd unknowingly bought him, with my own money through his emergency credit card use. He brought me a single rose, the kind you can buy at gas stations for $3, and acted like he'd moved mountains to afford it. At dinner, he was in rare form. He ordered the most expensive steak on the menu, added appetizers and cocktails, and even suggested we get dessert to celebrate properly. When the server asked if we wanted to see the wine list, David nodded enthusiastically. "Only the best for my girl." I watched him perform this charade with a mixture of fascination and disgust. He was so confident, so comfortable with the assumption that I'd handle everything. When he excused himself to take a business call during dinner, I knew exactly what he was really doing, probably texting Mike about how well his side hustle was going. But David made one crucial mistake that night. When I excused myself to use the restroom, I deliberately left my purse at the table, something I'd never done before. I wanted to test a theory that had been forming in my mind. I took my time in the bathroom, checking my makeup, scrolling through my phone. When I returned to the table, David was back in his seat, looking perfectly innocent. But something felt different about my purse. It was in the same position, but the zipper was slightly more open than I'd left it. My wallet, usually positioned with the cards facing forward, was now facing backward. I said nothing. I smiled, finished my dessert, and when the check came, I paid it without complaint. David kissed my cheek and thanked me for such a perfect evening. But as soon as I got home, I checked my banking app. $200 was missing from my wallet. David had actually stolen cash from me while I was in the bathroom. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect, trust, and the complete violation of everything I thought we had together. But instead of confronting him immediately, I smiled and told him I'd had a wonderful time. I had a plan. 2 days after the anniversary dinner, I put my plan into motion. I'd spent 48 hours researching David's real life, and what I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. Through some social media detective work and a conversation with his sister Emma, who it turned out had been wanting to warn me for months, I learned the truth. David wasn't building a startup. He'd never had a real job. For the past 2 years, he'd been cycling through older women, using the same struggling entrepreneur story to get them to support him financially. I was just the latest in a long line of victims. But here's what David didn't know about me. I don't just get mad, I get strategic. I invited him over for dinner on a Friday night, telling him I had something special planned. I cooked his favorite meal, opened a bottle of wine, and set the table with candles. David arrived expecting another evening of being pampered. After dinner, as we sat on my couch, I pulled out my laptop. "Babe, I've been thinking about your business. I want to help you take it to the next level." David's eyes lit up. "Really? What did you have in mind?" I turned the laptop screen towards him. On it was a detailed spreadsheet I'd created, listing every single expense I'd covered in our 6-month relationship. Dinners, groceries, his rent payments, gas money, the $500 investor meeting loan, clothes, entertainment, everything. The total was $4,247. "I've been tracking our shared expenses," I said calmly, "and I think it's time we had an honest conversation about our financial arrangement." David's face went pale. "Sarah, what is this?" "This," I said, pulling out my phone and showing him screenshots of his text conversation with Mike, "is me finally understanding what kind of business you're really running." The color drained completely from his face. "Sarah, I can explain—" "Oh, you don't need to explain anything," I interrupted, my voice getting stronger. "But I do have something to show you." I opened another tab on my laptop, a Facebook post I drafted but not yet published. It contained David's photo, screenshots of his texts about me being his side hustle, and a detailed account of his modus operandi, tagged with his full name and the names of his family members. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice deadly calm. "You're going to sit there and listen while I tell you exactly what I think of you. Then you're going to leave my house, and you're never going to contact me again. If you do, this post goes live, along with copies sent to your mother, your sister, and every single person in your contact list." David started to protest, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished," I said, my voice rising. "You want to know what your biggest mistake was? It wasn't stealing from me on our anniversary, though that was pretty fucking stupid. Your biggest mistake was underestimating me." I stood up, towering over him as he shrank into my couch. "You thought you found some lonely, desperate woman who'd be grateful for any attention from a younger man. You thought I was so pathetic that I'd pay for the privilege of being lied to. You thought I was just another easy mark." My voice was shaking with fury now. "But here's what you didn't count on. I'm not some victim. I'm a successful, intelligent woman who was choosing to be generous because I thought I was in love. The moment I realized you were a fraud, you stopped being my boyfriend and became my project." David tried to speak, but I cut him off. "And here's the beautiful part. While you were busy congratulating yourself on how well you were playing me, I was documenting everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every dollar you stole. I have enough evidence to destroy your little con game permanently." I leaned down, looking him directly in the eyes. "So here's your choice, David. You can leave quietly and disappear from my life forever, or I can make sure every woman in this city knows exactly what you are. What's it going to be?" The transformation in David's face was immediate and complete. The confident, charming mask fell away, revealing the pathetic, scared boy underneath. "Sarah, please! Get out of my house!" What happened next was something I never expected. David completely broke down. Instead of leaving, he collapsed back onto my couch and started crying. Not the manipulative tears I'd seen him use before when he wanted something, but raw, ugly sobbing that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. "You're right," he choked out between sobs. "You're absolutely right about everything." I stood there, arms crossed, watching this 28-year-old man fall apart in my living room. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part was genuinely shocked by the depth of his breakdown. "I'm not an entrepreneur," he continued, his voice breaking. "I'm not building anything. I'm just a fucking loser who's been lying to everyone, including myself." For the first time since I'd known him, David seemed completely, brutally honest. "My mom kicked me out 2 years ago because she caught me stealing from her purse," he said, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "Emma's been covering for me, telling people I'm finding myself. But the truth is, I've been bouncing between women using the same story, taking their money." I remained silent, letting him continue. "You want to know the worst part? I actually started to care about you, like really care. And that scared the shit out of me because I knew I'd have to keep lying to keep you." He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "The night I stole from your wallet, I hated myself so much I couldn't sleep." "Then why did you do it?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "Because it's all I know how to do," he said miserably. "I've been doing this for so long, I don't know how to be in a real relationship. I don't know how to contribute anything valuable. I'm 28 years old and I've never had a real job, never built anything, never been anything but a parasite." The vulnerability was so raw, it was almost uncomfortable to witness. This wasn't the charming, confident man I'd fallen for. This was a broken person who'd been running from his own inadequacy for years. "The texts you saw," he continued, "that's how I cope. I make jokes about it, pretend it's some kind of game, because if I admitted what I really am, someone who preys on good people, I'd probably kill myself." I sat down across from him, maintaining distance, but no longer looming over him. "Sarah, I know you have every right to destroy me. I know I deserve it. But can I tell you something?" I nodded. "You're the first person who ever made me want to be better. When you talked about your work, your goals, your independence, I was genuinely proud to be with you. Not because of your money, but because you're actually impressive." He paused, struggling with his words. I started fantasizing about actually becoming the person I was pretending to be. Maybe learning to code for real. Maybe starting an actual business. But every time I thought about coming clean, I got terrified that you'd leave, and I'd rather be a fake boyfriend than no boyfriend at all. The room fell silent except for his occasional sniffles. "I know this doesn't change anything," he said finally. "I know sorry doesn't give you back your money or your trust, but I need you to know that you didn't fall for a complete lie. The way I felt about you, that was real. It was probably the only real thing about me." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation, but all I saw was exhaustion and shame. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. I took a deep breath. "Now you leave. And you get help, real help, therapy, job training, whatever it takes to become an actual adult. And if I do that, if I actually change, then maybe someday you'll be worthy of someone's love, but it won't be mine." He nodded, accepting this. "Can I ask you one favor?" he said, standing up slowly. "What?" "Don't post that stuff about me. Not because I don't deserve it, but because I want to tell Emma and my mom the truth myself. They deserve to hear it from me." I considered this. "You have 48 hours to come clean to your family. If I don't hear from Emma that you've told them everything, the post goes live." "Fair enough." As he walked toward the door, he turned back one last time. "For what it's worth, Sarah, you're going to make someone very happy someday. Someone who actually deserves you." After he left, I sat in my living room for a long time, processing what had just happened. I'd expected satisfaction from my confrontation, but instead, I felt something more complex, a mixture of closure, sadness, and oddly, hope. Not hope for David and me, but hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd given him the wake-up call he needed to become a real person. 2 days later, Emma called me. Emma's call changed everything I thought I knew about the situation. "Sarah," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "David told us everything. About you, about the other women, about the lying and stealing. Our whole family is in shock." She paused and I could hear her crying softly. "But I need to tell you something else. Something David doesn't even know." My heart started racing. "Our dad left when David was 12, Emma continued. "He cleaned out our mom's bank account and disappeared. David found the note Dad left, saying he was tired of being responsible for everyone else's happiness, and that some people aren't meant for commitment." The pieces started falling into place. David idolized our dad before he left. After that, he became obsessed with the idea that all relationships are just people using each other, and if you're not the one taking, you're the one being taken from. Emma's revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. David's behavior wasn't just greed or laziness. It was a trauma response. A deeply damaged person trying to avoid abandonment by ensuring he never became emotionally or financially dependent on anyone. "I'm not excusing what he did to you," Emma quickly added, "but I wanted you to understand that your confrontation, it broke through something that's been building for 16 years. She told me that David had enrolled in community college to study computer programming for real. He'd gotten a part-time job at a local coffee shop and was seeing a therapist twice a week. Most importantly, he'd started paying our mom back for money he'd stolen over the years. He talks about you sometimes," Emma said quietly. "Not in a way where he thinks you'll take him back, but like you were the person who finally made him see who he really was." After Emma's call, I spent weeks reflecting on the entire experience. I realized that while David's actions were inexcusable, my own behavior hadn't been entirely healthy either. I'd been so eager to be needed, so desperate to feel valuable in a relationship, that I'd ignored obvious red flags. I started therapy myself, exploring why I was drawn to people who needed fixing. My therapist helped me understand that my generosity, while admirable, sometimes came from a place of insecurity rather than genuine abundance. 3 months later, I ran into David at a bookstore. He was thinner, looked tired, but there was something different in his eyes, a clarity that hadn't been there before. "Sarah," he said, approaching cautiously. "How are you?" "I'm good," I said and meant it. "I heard from Emma that you're making changes." He nodded. "It's hard, really hard, but I'm learning that being uncomfortable with myself is better than being disgusted with myself." We talked for a few minutes. He told me about his programming classes, his job, his therapy. He didn't ask for forgiveness or hint at reconciliation. He just seemed genuinely interested in how I was doing. "I owe you $4,247, he said before we parted ways. "I'm keeping track, and I will pay you back. It might take a while, but I will." "David," I said, "I don't need the money back. I need you to use it as motivation to never do this to anyone else." He nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "I won't. I promise you, I won't." 6 months after our breakup, I started dating again. This time I was different. I was more confident in setting boundaries, more aware of my own patterns, and more interested in finding an equal partner rather than someone to save. I met James at a hiking group, a 45-year-old divorced father who insisted on splitting every check and actually got offended when I tried to pay for our third date. "I asked you out," he said firmly. "I'm paying." It was such a small thing, but it meant everything. Looking back, I realized that David did me a favor, though not in the way he intended. He forced me to confront my own relationship patterns and taught me the difference between being generous and being a victim. I also learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to destroy someone who's hurt you, but to hold up a mirror and force them to see themselves clearly. David's breakdown in my living room wasn't manipulation. It was the first honest moment of his adult life. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, pay attention to the red flags. Trust your instincts. And remember that real love doesn't require you to diminish yourself financially, emotionally, or otherwise. If you're supporting someone's dreams, but they're not supporting your reality, you're not in a relationship. You're being used. And if you're the David in someone else's story, it's never too late to change. But it starts with being honest about who you really are. What's your experience? Have you ever found yourself in a relationship where you were giving everything and getting nothing back? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below.